What's the fastest you've seen someone quit and why? I've managed a metal fabrication shop for 20 years, hired a guy. Had experience, Dunn said. We started at 7:30, first break bell tang at 10, and we watched him run up a hill, the adjoining street, and never saw him again. No words, no warning, just gone. I look at that hill and think about him all the time. Story 2, Bank of America. Day 1, onboarding at a call center. They have motivation boosters of managers dressing up silly and singing chants, going to take a couple calls, handle time, going to be low. Lady gets bug-eyed, looks around and says, "This is a ducking cult," and ran out a fire exit. Story 3. I once did an induction shift with this woman, who I then noticed never came in again. I then bumped into her in the street a month or so later and asked what happened. Turned out she won $3 million on the lottery on the same day she started her job. Not sure if she even quit, just didn't come back in. Story 4. During the dot-com boom, we were growing very quickly. We hired a network and infrastructure manager with many qualifications and accreditations. Our existing guy was less formally qualified, but was brilliant. We needed our existing guy to work more directly on our products. The new guy arrived, moaned about how unprofessional our existing guy was, insisted on implementing a different backup routine, accidentally deleted the entire email account and calendar of the COO, deleted the backups whilst trying to restore it, and was sacked by lunchtime. Story 5. Had a guy take a job at our site, which is about a 30-mile drive into the middle of nowhere. On his first day, lunchtime came around, and he asked, "What was good to eat around here? It's in the middle of nowhere." By the time you got to the closest restaurant, if you turned around as soon as you got there, you would be 10 minutes late getting back. Everyone brings their own lunch. We told him this. He got in his truck and left and never came back. Story 6. Buddy of mine started at the Bob Evans I was working at on a Sunday morning. He walked into the kitchen and immediately out the back door. He texted me and said it was too busy, and he had an immediate panic attack. I understood, but was kind of screwed. If you've ever been to a Bob Evans on a Sunday morning, you'd understand. Story 7. 3 hours myself. I got hired at a supermarket as a front-end supervisor, given my experience in a similar role at a competitor. They started me out bagging groceries, during which time I realized everything was worse at this company. Benefits, hours, bagging system, POS system, uniforms, etc. At 3 hours, they told me time for a break. I told them I don't think this is a good fit and walked out. Story 8. I got a second job at a warehouse. We did onboarding in the morning, then had lunch. Our instructor was late coming back from lunch, so we were just sitting there. We start seeing people run around outside the classroom, and eventually paramedics come and wheel the instructor out on a stretcher from the bathroom. Apparently they OD'd in the bathroom during lunch. They lived. HR told us to come back tomorrow. I didn't. Story 9. It's me. Started a remote job and was told on day 1 that we had to have our cameras on at all time. I was set to be in training for the first 4 weeks, so I assumed they meant during training. Not ideal, but I could understand that to an extent, to make sure we are paying attention. No, they meant we had to keep them on all the time. Entire 8-hour shift, even after training, and it would be recorded. And these webcams had built-in microphones as well. I know remote employers can and do track keystrokes, idle time, etc., and I've come to expect some micromanagement as a trade-off for working remotely. But this was not my first remote job, and I'd never had an employer attempt something so overbearing. Nobody could answer my question about how long the recordings were stored for, who had access to them, and why this was even necessary. I felt that chances were nobody would actually watch any of that footage, unless someone was already suspected of something weird. But I didn't feel like having all background noise and my entire workday creepily watched from afar. So I quit on day 2, story 10. Another one. My wife, she took a job at the local McDonald's in town, worked for 2 hours, said duck this, and left and never went back. She got a job a few days later at the local discount grocery store and stayed there for a couple years. Story 11. I quit my job as a cashier at Walgreens about 2 hours into my second shift. First shift was only about 4 hours long, doing orientation and watching training videos. Around 10% of the training videos were about the job and customer service, etc. The other 90% was about theft, shoplifting, how to spot shoplifters, how to stop them, how to spot and report your fellow employees who are very likely stealing stuff. Oh, and they assume every person who works there is stealing anything they can get their hands on. So, if you bring your lunch, you have to tape the receipt to the food. I just started today and didn't know I had to provide a receipt. I bought this banquet pot pie at Walmart last week and don't have the receipt on me. They threatened to write me up for theft on my first day. I had no idea of the policies since I'd literally just started, and they could have easily checked the cameras to see me not stealing anything from the grocery section. I stupidly went back for my second shift and made it about 2 hours. They totally abandoned me at the cash register. I did not know how to call anyone for help, and I didn't know anyone's name or who to ask for help. They told me to clock out for lunch at 10 a.m., and I said, no, I need to count out my drawer and leave. Story 12. I own a residential cleaning company. We had a new hire leave 5 minutes after they started training, announcing, "I didn't know I'd be working in people's homes and this is weird." Story 13. Interviewed on Monday, started Tuesday, went in and filled out the paperwork. Got placed at a desk and found out that the admin position was cold, calling people with a robot dialer, old school, to sell coupon books for local high schools in states more than a day's dive away. Even handed a fake bio of who we were and why we were selling these books. Was gone in less than half an hour. Story 14. I used to work at this mobile auto glass repair company, and this one kid wouldn't stop playing Pokemon Go. 2 hours in his first shift, he quit and reported to the manager that a technician he was with was extremely rough on him. Story 15. I got an amazing job in medical sales with a top company back in 2005. I was able to leave education making $32,000 and instantly double my pay. They made us go to training for 6 weeks. It was intense but fun. If you failed 3 tests in the entire time you were there, you were fired. Done. The first week we had pharmacology. Friday morning was the test. This great guy from Miami all week would just not come down to the common area to study. He failed it. While everyone else's was enjoying their Friday after 10:30 a.m., we helped him study all day, and he passed it at 4:30. He did the same crap the following 2 Fridays and was gone. I never understood that. He had just finished his as an older man after being a taxi driver for over 12 years. He broke into an extremely difficult career with lots of gatekeeping back then, for us brown people. He made it, and then he threw it away. I'll never understood that. Story 16. It was me. I started at a small contractor. I already had 10 years of experience. My first day, I walked into the shop area to find the service manager that hired me, and I see the owner cussing and yelling at another technician. The owner sees me standing there watching this, and he wants to know who the hell I am. I told him, I'm the new guy, and I quit. Walked right back out, got my car, and left. Never even got clocked in. Story 17. 2 were fired, both on second day. I know, this isn't a quit scenario. First guy started on Tuesday with Wednesday off for a pre-scheduled appointment. Second guy started Wednesday. So they both started their second day on Thursday. Both attempted to train the other. Enter juvenile power play seniority mode. By the time the first break started, they were duking it out in the parking lot. Both fired on the spot. Story 18. Had a friend started a job on yachts. Fun fact, an out-of-water yacht is about 50 feet off the ground. He arrived at 8 a.m., filled out his paperwork, and watched a safety video. 9:30, he goes up the ladder. First break is 9:45. He climbed down, got in his truck, and left. Story 19. We were training a new hire, and after a couple hours, he said he needed to run to his car for some mints. He never came back. We found a post-it note on his desk when we went looking for him. Story 20. I had a new hospital security hire come in for his orientation shift. I showed him around and we're in ICU. He says he needs to use the restroom, and I said, okay. I waited for about 10 minutes, went looking for him, and couldn't find him anywhere. He just left. Lasted all of 10 minutes. Story 21. We had a temp receptionist that worked in our office for a few days and then stopped showing up. She didn't exactly quit, but she got arrested and was in jail for selling substances, and that's why she stopped coming to work. Story 22. Happened to me a couple of years ago. I applied at a chicken processing plant. They had a big sign stating wages of $16 an hour. I get in due paperwork and I'm promptly told starting pay is $11 an hour. This should have been a red flag, but I was desperate. I got through the safety training in the classroom about 4 hours. Was told I would be packing the chicken into boxes. I thought to myself, easy enough. In actuality, I was stacking pallets with 40-pound boxes of chicken. I did one pallet, lunch bell rang, and I walked home. Story 23. I managed a music store in the early 90s, had an employee come in on their first day, worked until the first 15-minute break, never came back from break. We found a bunch of broken cassette holders in the bathroom. They had worked 2 hours and stolen half dozen cassettes. They idiotically tried to use me for a reference a couple months later. Story 24. My friends worked at Sonic for a few hours before they said, duck this, pretended like they needed to go to the bathroom and hauled ass out of there. Never went back. It was that bad, apparently. Story 25. Had a senior event planner, director overseeing all of our corporate events. This is with a large, well-known corporation. Supposedly, had years of fabulous experience. In our first meeting, she trashed the previous person in her role. She also spent the day on Pinterest looking for event inspiration. Luckily, my boss decided to do a deep internet dive, which our agency was supposed to have done. She discovered the phone numbers attached to her references came back to people with the same last name as her. Not the CEO of her last company, after all, but her husband, who answered the phone and pretended to be a CEO. She and our agency were both fired on the same day. Story 26. New receptionist didn't come back from lunch on their first day. No call, and never inquired about getting paid for those few hours. This was when we were paid with physical checks. Story 27. I worked at a small nursing home. 75 beds. The maintenance supervisor quit without notice. They hired a guy who claimed to have supervised the environmental services department at a 400-bed facility. This guy called the ES staff in for a meeting, listened to our grievances, was taking notes, said he was going to do this, that, and the other. His first day on the job, he left for his lunch break and never came back. Story 28. My son took a job that seemed to have vague requirements. They put him and several other new hires in a van and dumped them in a neighborhood with brochures to sell power plants door to door. He called his mom for a pickup and never returned. Story 29. I used to work in social work, and my manager hired a woman that had gotten her social work degree 20 years ago and had never actually used it. Her kids were recently off to college, and she said she wanted to work in the field because she had a lot of time on her hands. I told the manager I didn't think we should hire her because she was going to be in for a really rude awakening to what it was actually like to work in that specific entry-level job. Sure enough, she showed up for one shift and then ghosted the company. Story 30. I worked at Chick-fil-A for 2 4-hour training shifts and then quit. All I did was oil buns 4 hours straight. I was in the back of house with no windows. I felt like a robot. I cried before my 3rd training shift and then told them I couldn't do it anymore. I managed at 2 food service jobs before that, but IDK man, it felt wrong there. Story 31. We had a woman who was re-entering the workforce after being SOM for over 20 years. She needed extra cash because her husband was really sick. Came in on her first day, went home for lunch, and didn't come back. Felt it was too much for her to handle. Story 32. I'm thinking of that great moment in Parks and Rec when Gene gets a job with the accountants, walks in, says he lied on his resume, immediately harassed a female employee and showed himself out. Story 33. Our company hired a guy who started at 9 a.m., then we are fairly certain went and did coke in the bathroom in the first hour. A half hour later crashed out and threatened to fight his boss and had to be ordered to leave by 10:30. This was in an office set. Story 34. I worked for a fleet garage of garbage truck. A guy comes in, drops of his toolbox, chats to a couple of us, long enough for us to find he was hired at a higher wage rate. He comes back 2 weeks later, picks up his tools and leaves. My coworker and I got a raise. Story 35. In the late 90s, as a teenager, I was working at a pizza shop. I was the only server who showed up for the lunch rush. They had a weird process where the cashier behind the counter had to make the waitstaff's chain. No cashier at the counter, no tabs getting closed, so people were getting irritated waiting. And I was slammed already. Decided to make my own change to keep it moving. Immediately was accused of stealing. Waited and watched as they counted the drawer in front of all my coworkers, which of course came up even. Entirely offended, I told them all to duck off, dropped my apron on the counter, walked out, took off my work shirt, had a shirt underneath, pulled a lighter out of my pocket and lit that crap on fire, and left it burning out front in the parking lot. Rolled out in my 1985 Pontiac Firebird. My parents love retelling this story. Story 36. Dating myself. But when clerks came out, I thought working at a convenience store would be cool. I'm female. I was easy to toss around. They hired me on the spot and started to explain that I was going to be there alone most of the time, and where the police call button, how to lock things down in case of a robbery, how to do the restocking of fridge stuff alone, etc. I noped out of there after about 30 minutes. Another time, I was working at a budding internet company in customer service. I did a pretty good job, so they gave me a raise and a title change, all to discover that they put me in the call center marketing position where I had to do cold calls all day. I left after 2 calls, and after they said they would not move me back to my old position. Story 37. We had a new guy. Hadn't been working there very long. Mid-shift, he said he had to leave and wouldn't be back. He was quitting to take care of personal business. I asked if he'd like to take a leave of absence instead and how long he needed to take care of things. He said 1 to 5. He left for his sentencing hearing that got moved up. Story 38. It wasn't exactly the fastest, but definitely my favorite. I worked for a small company. We worked on heavy equipment, our own, did snow removal, sandblasting, and again in-house, and mechanical repairs. The boss's brother was a loudmouth, and we often clashed. It came to a head one day, and the brother went to the boss. I wasn't there, but apparently he said, either I go or he goes. So he was let go. Story 39. There was a time that I didn't manage a client engagement well and got canned for it. The project sponsor had a crap fit about all of the errors that were showing up in the liquidity reporting app we'd built, and the PM threw me under the bus to save his own skin. The stupid thing about the situation was that I was already on top of all the issues the sponsor was complaining about, which were primarily down to the crappy data quality of the feeds we were ingesting from the client's other systems, none of which had been adequately documented or communicated to us during the project, of course. But the project sponsor had lost patience with us. They wanted a scalp, and I was proffered up to be the designated victim. It was pretty unfair, but I hadn't played it very canny or kept receipts. So I figured I'd take my licks, learn a lesson about covering my arse better, and be a professional about handing off the job. After all, the guy who was brought in to take over from me was completely new, hadn't had anything to do with me getting stitched up, and the reporting app itself was fundamentally sound. It just needed to have a pilot phase running with real data to work the kinks out, and we had just completed that. My problem was that I hadn't managed the client's expectations properly, and I hadn't realized that my PM was a cowardly weasel who didn't have my back until it was too late. So I took a day or two to clean up all my notes and do a full write-up, then spent the rest of the week giving the new guy a soup-to-nuts walkthrough of all the issues that had come up, along with the mapping and fixes that needed to be applied for the next build and manual workarounds that he could use to keep the sponsor sweet until the new version got deployed. I basically handed him the project on a plate, all tied up with a bow on top. All he had to do was follow the script I'd shared with him, and he'd have been a hero. The guy who came in cold to a failing project rescued it from the idiot who had driven it into a ditch and got it turned around with a month or two of repair work. I heard later on from our account manager at that company that the new guy resigned just 2 days after I left. Apparently, he claimed that he just wasn't up to the job, although he had seemed to be following my explanations during the handover perfectly well and had been asking reasonable questions. Of course, it's entirely probable that he had just been desperately nodding along and maintaining a confident front with me, whereas in reality he was in way over his head and his nerve failed once. I wasn't there to hold his hand, but I like to think that it's possible he spotted what a prick the PM was quicker than I did and bailed out of a toxic situation. I never discovered whether anyone else was found to apply my fixes and rescue the app. It would have been a shame for it to fail given how much work I put into it, but if the sponsor ended up disappointed, then so it goes. They could have been a little more patient or a little less credulous, and they'd have had a nice tool that would have shaved a meaningful percentage off their liquidity costs, but they weren't. So duck them. Story 40. A job at a call center in college. She just got up from her cubicle on her first day after a couple of hours, clocked out, left, and never returned. I ran into her maybe a year or so later and started making small talk. She completely forgot working there. Story 41. 35 years ago, at the start of my maintenance engineering career, I started day one at a cement factory. After an hour's induction, I know. It was the early 90s. I was put to work outside in 33-degree heat, removing a 50-kilowatt agitator motor's mounting bolts. Each 16-millimeter nut, there were around 24 of them covered in rock-hard concrete about 50 millimeters thick. After about 4 hours at lunchtime, I had chiseled about half off. I packed up for lunch, handed my notice in, and re-entered the job market. I got paid in experience that day. Story 42. We hired a new manager at my company. There was a welcome breakfast. He never showed up. Emailed HR and said he decided he wasn't going to work there. Story 43. I went to start a new role, and first day was handed 5 government projects and left alone at a corner desk. No guidance, no check-ins, just, hey, we need these projects done by the end of the week. I came from a different sector, and they knew that. CEO even told me, hey, I know you're from a different sector, but that's what makes you an engineer, figure it out. I left after the second day. Could already tell what kind of vibe it was going to be. Story 44. We had a new director of maintenance, quit before the old director of maintenance had even turned in his keys and company phone and laptop. New guy's name became a verb in our hangar for a few years after that. Story 45. I was desperate for a job, and there was a call center for the PBA about a mile from my house. I applied, and they had me start the next morning. I did that for 2 hours, and then my manager came over and said a bunch of weird, creepy stuff. I didn't want to talk to him, and I said I needed to go to the bathroom. He said I had to wait another hour. I got up and left. Story 46. I did. I had just recovered from a car accident during COVID, and the reality checks affected my perspective. I was assigned to an office with an overly anxious micromanager. She had me sit outside the office proper and came to check on me frequently. The volume of work did not warrant my assignment, and her label emotions didn't align with my get things done efficiently and kindly approach. I called up my contractors to be reassigned and found they were expecting my call. I was their last resort. Next day, I was assigned further away, but the folks were great. Story 47. I used to work for a very famous dental aligner company, and China was by far the largest market in our region. However, when it came to training new reps, the information they were expected to internalize was so voluminous that there were a number of sales reps that just quit or walked out after the first tea break on the first day of work. Story 48. I worked at a place for a day and quit because it was just wrong, and I knew it was after seeing what they did and how. When I was 18 years old going into college, we had orientation on campus. There was this guy there who was telling everyone about his fashion brand that he owns and stuff. Then about halfway through orientation, he decided he wanted to leave and got upset with the staff when they informed him that he was not supposed to leave until orientation ended and that he could not continue at the school unless orientation was completed. He left and never came back. I dropped out after the first year at that school and never transferred the 20 credits I earned that year to my community college. Tuition was ridiculous. We were the COVID class because I graduated high school in 2020 and it was hell going into college with all of that going on. I haven't really been right or all there so to speak since then. Story 49. I got a job at a call center and there was 48 total new hires on the first day, and we had an orientation presentation. One of the speakers was the head of security, and he mentioned that no weapons are allowed on the property, even if you had a permit. One woman raised her hand and said that she was going to bring her gun anyway, and she needed it for protection against her ex-husband. The security guy went outside the room and spoke to her privately, and she never returned. Story 50. Woman threw up in the wastebasket an hour into her first day. Poor thing, I thought. She's sick or really nervous. Out sick the next day. Back one day, out the next. Never came back. Turns out she was hungover or still drunk. Story 51. I work in a construction office. This lady came from a car dealership to work in our office processing contracts. She went to lunch on her first day and never came back. Apparently, she quit the car dealership because they crossed too much. Why she thought a construction office would be less cussing is beyond me. Story 52. Myself and a new girl were being trained on how to make calls. She went to lunch and never came back. Turns out her mom worked in the department as well. Story 53. Worked in an incredibly toxic workplace. I was stuck due to a contract. They hire a new office accountant. After seeing the way the books were kept, cough cooked cough, and how the owner treated everyone, he went to lunch and never came back. I envied him. Story 54. The fastest I quit. Years ago, I started an office job at a clothing supplier. Their computers were pre-Windows and thus required a lot of shortcuts knowledge. But the job was otherwise incredibly simplistic with a lot of downtime. Day 2 of the job, I checked with HR to see if there was anything more complicated I'd be learning, and the fact that I asked was proof it was the wrong fit. I lasted only a day and a half. It took me 9 months to get another job after that. No regrets. Story 55, personal story. Had a buddy recommend me to work at a Domino. Go in for 2 hours first day. Computer system is just obtuse with different ways to order a pizza. I'm sure I would have figured it out in time though. But my uniform shirt was a size too small. Well worn and had armpit holes. Never went back. Played hide and stink with that uniform shirt with him and another buddy for a while. Story 56. Not a first day, neither a first week, but the person worked less than a month. I'll tell the story because it stuck with me. It was a call center job and this guy was extremely charming on the phone with the client. It was not receptive, but active. So we would call and offer cable TV services to people, and he almost always made it. We were all baffled. I don't believe in magic or these things, but people were starting to say he put a spell with whomever he talked on the phone. It felt crazy to me even then, but my colleagues were impressionable. The problem is that he was a complete snob and ignorant with most of us, including the boss. He would arrive late and leave early whenever he pleased. He took longer breaks and sometimes chat loudly and for a long time with colleagues. He would also slightly bully others or make mean comments. And he did not accept being reprimanded. He would literally argue with the boss. She was new to the role, and the center really needed the sales. It was a small place, probably about 20 to 30 people. I don't remember exactly because it was many years ago. Anyway, the day he left, she was scolding him for one of those things, and he did not get physical, but he screamed, belittled her, and literally called her name. Many people, including me, were shocked and afraid. We were young, including the boss. I think she was like freshly 21. Mostly women. And for many of us, it was a first job. There was no HR nor anyone senior. I don't even think the type of company was allowed to have that many people working. We were paid in cash, etc. She didn't make a complaint, press charges, or anything. I left shortly after. Story 57. I worked at a pickle factory for 4 hours. The brine smell permeated everything and made me nauseated. I threw up at the lunch break, went to the trainer, and told him I was out. Luckily, it was a summer gig, so I found something else quickly. But that paid very well, so I was bummed. It took me years to enjoy pickles again. Story 58. At my former job, automotive warehouse, it was pretty common for some folks to start that first shift and go outside to their car at first break to grab something and just leave and never come back. Apparently during the interview, when giving a heads up that it gets hot there in the summer and cold in the winter due to no real temperature control for the bulk of the warehouse, in conjunction with lifting upwards of 50 to 60 pounds continuously, it doesn't really sink in until they actually start. For my current job, the guy didn't even make it until first break per the manager of that department. They had a posting for weeks. Finally found a younger guy straight out of school that they were willing to train. So They did a walkthrough tour of the area he would be working in and then had an orientation and some videos to watch, since the area had special safety regulations, foam creation, hazards, etc. From what they said, he got an email during the orientation session for a position at the FDA he had been eyeing while still in school, so he immediately apologized to the HR rep, but said they would not be staying, probably not even an hour into the day. Story 59, worked in a call center that got incredibly understaffed. The rule was all callers had to speak to a human within 2 minutes, or management bonuses would suffer. They finally hired a room full of temps, 40 of them. Their only job was to say, "Thank you for calling us, please hold." Otherwise, zero training. The only reason our customers call is because they were angry. They immediately started screaming at these untrained kids. After lunch, only one of the 40 came back. Story 60, managed a warehouse, hired a new foreman. Great resume, claimed 20 years experience. First red flag was, she didn't look like the person I interviewed. I brushed it off to maybe she just changed her hair or different makeup or whatever. Second red flag, she couldn't even work a simple handheld pallet jack. She struggled to get it under the pallet and kept hitting things while moving the pallet. Couldn't line it up at all to place it in the new location. I definitely questioned her experience after that, and I think she must have known she was caught. She left after only 2.5 hours and never returned. Another new foreman lasted only a couple of days when I gave him the task to sweep the warehouse aisles. He had the audacity to tell me that sweeping was beneath him. I told him I swept the entire warehouse every week on Sunday, and if I could do it, so could he, and put the broom in his hand. He quit the next day. I had no sympathy for laziness or liars. I'd rather not have any foremen than ones like them. Story 61. I worked as a temp at Amazon. We started with about 50 plus people. By the 2 weeks mark, we had 26 of them left. When I left to go back to school 3 months later, there was 4 of us. I went, and then we're 3. I have other stories, but everyone knows Amazon sucks, and just throwing another log on the huge bonfire about them. Story 62. Fastest I've ever seen someone quit was one shift on their own, driving a plow truck. We hired this lady that claimed she drove school bus, box truck, and worked construction. Paid her to sit there in the passenger seat and learn the route, and how to run the controls. Reasonably straightforward. Put the blades down, press a few buttons and maintain speed, drive from point A to B, record totals in time, drive back, repeat. First time she got in the driver's seat, pulled out of the shop with her plow down, nearly took out a wall, gets the truck out onto the road, and she's weaving like she's drunk and driving into traffic head on. Pulled right over, calls the boss. I quit. I can't do this. Construction industry is brutal, instant blacklist behavior. Nobody will even let her pick up a shovel to dog crap off a road. Story 63. I worked at a very nice restaurant as a waitress, made good money for being 18. The drama got to be too much, so I put my 2 weeks in and left. Found another job as a waitress at a local restaurant that wasn't as well known, but closer to home. My first day when showing me around, they had pointed out where to go to smoke on break. I told them I didn't smoke because I didn't. About 1.5 hours in, I could tell the job was not going to work out. The kitchen was nasty, and it was so poorly run, they wanted to throw me in without showing me a thing. So I asked them if I could go smoke. The lady looked at me so confused and said sure, and I booked it and never looked back. Still feel like I dodged a bullet. Story 64. Sort of related. I worked in social services and could see people's previous income when they applied. The thing was, it was only listed by the quarter, so Q1 2026 $10,000 and such. 10K looked impressive as 5 digits, but was only 40K per year. Sadly, I often saw $1,500 quarter. And somehow I came across a dude that did $1.55 in a quarter. Dude did 10 minutes at a fast food place and called it quits for 3 months. Story 65. I worked for a tree trimming company. Had one guy first day showed up at the client's house. He got the whole safety speech and don't smoke on the property. He loaded up a cart to take the gas cans and chainsaws down a hill. Told my boss he's been having a rough day and needed to go pick up some cigarettes. Boss was really chill guy. Told him no worries, handed him a $10, told him to pick him up a Mountain Dew and candy bar and he could keep the change. 5 minutes at the job site and never came back. Story 66. I worked at a place that was so bad, people would say they were coming to start work the next day and then just wouldn't show up. One guy did turn up at lunch, told me that he thought the place really sucked. He handed in his uniform and was never seen again. A young woman managed 2 full days. She kept telling me that the boss was incredibly incompetent, and I agreed, kept telling her to push on through and that I would do my best to keep the boss away from her. Middle of her 3rd day, she made herself vomit, left in a taxi and just never came back. Another woman showed up for the first few days, tried her best to show off to the boss, and did her best to get an incompetent employee fired so that her partner would be hired at a lower salary. She had made the mistake of pretending to have actual experience in the role, so missed out on the basic training that was offered as standard to complete newbies. I turned up one morning and was told that she wasn't coming back. I was asked to cover her responsibilities. Lots of other staff would go to the boss after a few weeks or even a month of employment and tell her that they had a sick grandparent in another town that they needed to look after. The boss seemed to be completely unaware that she was the reason for the high turnover of staff I stayed for 10.5 months before leaving for a much better job. In hindsight, it wasn't a surprise that the place went bust soon afterwards. I just wish I had left earlier. Story 67. I was working with a brand new person, and as soon as he took his break on his first day, he left the job and never came back. I think he mentioned to another coworker that something happened in his family and was leaving. Story 68. I quit after 3 hours of a working interview. It was for a home staging company. It was bright and early 5 a.m. call time. We had to pack up and move furniture and decor from one house to another. Okay, simple enough. Got to the second house and thought I would have met the owner as I was working with her senior decorator and assistant. Owner never came. And then they proceeded to tell me I will be working until 2 or 3 p.m. I said, no way. I have to leave at 8 a.m. to get my kids and no end time was ever disclosed. They were shocked that I would leave, but I told them this was a working interview. You saw I can take direction and not break anything. What else more is there to see? Plus, they advertised the job for Sam to make some extra money. What did they think Sam do all day? They take the kids to and from school. It took them a week to cut me a check for my time. Could have just Venmo's me the money. I felt like they only had 2 employees and then would have working interviews from time to time when they needed extra hands with no intention of hiring anyone. Story 69. I used to work at a small French bistro, and my manager was doing a working interview with some chick applying to be the host. Towards the end of her working interview, we asked her if she wanted anything to eat. We had just made ourselves French toast Monte Cristos, and I took the first bite of mine and said, "Ooh, that made my busy pucker." And she walked out and left without saying anything, and right after that, story 70. Technically, I quit my installer job for mini splits after watching my coworker fall from the ceiling and bleed out a good amount of blood. Then, the following day, the owner made everyone switch to being a contracted employee, as the guy that fell didn't have a safety harness, nor was one ever provided in any of our trucks. And before this, they did have workers' insurance. So I assumed that the switch to being a contracted worker was so they could cover their asses over the fact no safety equipment was used and place the blame on the guy that fell. Glad I left long crap hours with no overtime and only pay by the day. That was not worth it, and 6-day work week. Story 71, pest control, call center. Training was 6 weeks, mostly due to a complicated scheduling system and just callers freaking out because they have bed bugs or some other creepy crawly issue. The company got fed up with going easy on the trainees in the beginning, only to have them quit 3 or 4 weeks into training. So they adjusted the training to the first 2 days of training was for setting expectation. Before training, the trainer informed the classes that if you're squeamish, then feel free to leave whenever you feel you need to. But once you leave, you can't return. On day 1 for a class of 25, they played actual calls for upset customers and showed horrific videos for bed bugs, snakes, rats, mice, and anything else the callers might have to deal with. By lunch, the class was down to 15, and by the end of the day, the class was down to 5. The company considered it a smart move. Rather than spending time and money to train people only to have them quit before 6 weeks was up, they just weeded them out early. Usually, the remaining trainees turned out to be great employees. Story 72. I took a job at a steel mill in my 20s. Day 2 noticed all the scars on the employees around me and decided that job wasn't for me. People looked to have too many work injuries. One lady had fresh stitches. I noped out. I don't mind working hard, but I mind safety. Story 73. New teacher, first week, classroom next to mine. Students were horrible all day, all week. I went into his classroom a few times a day to talk strictly, yell to his student. Last period of the week, one of his students pulled the fire alarm and the whole school had to evacuate. I passed his room next to mine as my class was evacuating. I looked into his room and he was on the floor, curled up into a fetal position. He never came back. Story 74. Me. I was hired as a Panera GM, and upon seeing my new store, cafe, very much not new, and the 5 million ducking terrible and disgusting things about it, left. Story 75. I quit a job after 3 hours. I'm a truck driver and hired into a mom-and-pop trucking company with 6 trucks. Told them I run legal, and they said no problem. Did a road test, substances test, physical, and they gave me truck to move into and said I'd get a dispatch in a bit. This company was in Brantford, The truck they gave me had no AC, and it was September, so I went into office and told them, saying they said run it, and they will fix it later. And said my first dispatch was going to be picking up in Detroit and going to Atlanta for the following morning. Told them that was way more than the 11 hours I could do in a day, and they said just fix my logbook. Told them, told you I run legal, and they said just do it. I said, "No, thank you." They said in a baby voice, if I lick it up for you, do you think you might be able to do a whittle work? I said, "Sure, you can pick it up and deliver tea and get the AC fixed for whoever you hire." Because I quit. Story 76. I worked as a contractor at a state agency with absolutely hellish corporate culture. Each department hated the other, and meetings often turned into hostile turf wars where nothing would ever get finished or accomplished. A fellow contractor project manager was in yet another unproductive meeting. He was working on a company-wide onboarding of a new ticketing system, gathering updates for his report, and was informed by some department head they just flat out didn't have any updates or goals met for their metrics. This is after stalling for months to get any information on statuses. The dude just stood up, gathered his laptop, and walked out. He was last seen driving off, never to return. Many months later, I noticed he had updated his LinkedIn profile with a photo of him standing in front of Stonehenge. I suspect the job might have pushed him to some kind of existential break. Regardless, totally respected his power move and no ducks given. Story 77. Had a lady come in for her first day. Asked, is this a bad neighborhood? It isn't. Saw all the crackheads and tweakers swarming the place. 2 a.m. at a gas station. That's just to be expected. And yes, most of them are on the trespassing list. And yes, cop station is a block away. She left so damn fast. Story 78. We hired a temp admin employee right after we had a leak that caused a stinky ceiling tile. A disgruntled employee told her we had sick building syndrome, which was a load of tosh, but the damage was done. She didn't return after lunch, just ghosted us. Story 79. 11:30 a.m. We hired a project assistant. She spent the morning being show around and being introduced to everyone. Left for lunch at 11:30 a.m. and never returned. Story 80. I quit at the interview. They advertised the job as this great marketing job with Apple. Great office downtown, upward mobility, the works. Turned out to be the assholes selling at and Target. I left as soon as I put the pieces together. The job required you to wear a 3-piece suit daily. Nobody, and I repeat, nobody, wants to talk to those guys when they are shopping at Target. I was damned if I was going to be one. Story 81. I worked for a tiny weekly newspaper, and Tuesday we'd put in the store inserts and I'd attach the mailing labels for those that needed it. We had people who just needed a little extra money stuffing papers. One guy worked a couple hours, went out on the loading dock for a smoke, and we never saw him again. Story 82. I was training a new person on the job. They said they had to go to lunch, and they never came back. Several weeks later, that person used this job for a job reference. The manager couldn't figure out who she was. Well, she was the 4-hour employee. I doubt she even got paid. Why did she even bothering asking our department for a reference? Story 83. Digging trenches in clay. The bottom of the trench was recently flooded and was filled with the stickiest liquid mud ever. It varied between ankle and knee deep. The boss hired a bunch of temps to dig out the slime so he could pour concrete. You had to reach 2 to 3 feet down to get a scoop, but the stuff was so fluid it would slide off the shovel before you could get it to the top of the trench. I was one of those temps. One of the other guys got frustrated and jumped in the trench. He sunk to his knees and the rest of us laughed. I don't think he was worth us more than an hour. Story 84. In high school, my buddy got a job at Sears. The manager told him to walk around the store to get a feel for it. He walked around about 20 minutes and stopped next to men's underwear, decided it wasn't for him. He moped out without talking to anyone and never came back. Story 85. My company needed to hire a bunch of temps for some data entry for 6 weeks. Decent money for college kids on winter break. My son and several of his friends did it. One of my friend's sons also started. 1 or 2 days in, I get a text from her saying her son isn't coming back. He didn't like it. Story 86. Truckload dispatcher. First day Monday. Light orientation in the morning. Sat with the boss for the afternoon to get some hands on TMS. With lead dispatcher. Tasked with calling drivers with load info. Weds am sitting at own desk. Got told he couldn't wear earpod, as to answer phone is primary function. Didn't come back after lunch break. Story 87. Hired admin staff for some minor work. She threatened to meet a longtime regular in the parking lot over a work matter. She was escorted to her vehicle by security about 10 hours into her employment. Story 88. New material handler, interview, hired, started the next Monday. 6:30 a.m. start. I introduced to a few people, got him set up in a comfy office to read a few quick things and sign for his orientation. Came back at around 7:15 and he was gone. Never heard from him again. Story 89. I started working at a clinic and was treated poorly by the older people who worked there because they thought since I was new and they had seniority, it was okay to talk down to me if I asked questions during my first week of training. By my 3rd week of working there, I had a video interview during my lunch break at a hospital in the city. And 2 hours later, I was offered the position. The next day, I had to tell my supervisor that I was offered a position with better pay. And at the end of the day, I wrote up my resignation letter, signed it, and put it on her desk. Story 90. I framed houses and we hired a guy that talked a big game. First day, we were doing some demo for an addition. I was carrying it out of second floor window, across the roof, and throwing it on tarps and sheets. New guy had to pick it up and carry it to the dumpster. Boss tears his pants, says he's going for new pants, and leaves. Right now, we are about 2 hours into the day. New guy flips out on me that we are making him do all the work and leaves. He stood there watching me for most of the time, sweating out a 30-pack or detoxing. Calls the boss later, looking to be paid immediately. Boss gives him minimum wage for his 2 hours on the next payday. When I was on a masonry crew, a lot of guys would quit at the 9:30 break, but our pace was ridiculous if you weren't used to it. Story 91. Worked at an injection molding plant. Think storage containers being made. We had an entire orientation group come around the circumference of the production floor, and every single one walked out right then, like 10 people, give or take. Story 92. The environmental lab I was working at started hiring from a temp service. They sent a guy over, and on his walkthrough, he said, "I don't think this will work. I had to leave my last job at a dry cleaners due to chemical exposure. We use hazardous chemicals for nearly every test. I don't think the temp service actually paid any attention to who or where they sent people, and the lab stopped using the temp service about a year later." Story 93. Had a partner at a previous job who was an absolute mess. She had no business being in the line of work we were both in at the time. I later moved on to a different but similar industry. And a couple years in, my supervisor mentions that a person they interviewed said they knew me. When I found out it was her, I told them that leaving the position open would do more good than hiring her. They didn't listen. Halfway through the first shift, she went home sick. The next day she called out. Day after she called to quit because it was too stressful. Mind you, the work we did before was literal life and death stuff sometimes. This was much more clinical and safe and low stakes. Story 94. I moved back to my hometown after living in Chicago for 5 years. I had been an assistant manager at a Michelin star restaurant. When I moved back home, I just wanted chill jobs where I'd actually make tips and get to leave my job at home. I interviewed for a basic server, bartender position at a busy Mexican fusion, aka Mexican for white people, restaurant that was part of a small local restaurant group. They actually offered me an assistant manager position, but I told them I was looking for something low-key. Obviously was hired. The day before my first day, I realized they never told me what to wear. I emailed the manager who hired me and asked what the dress code was. She said to wear dark jeans, a belt, and black shoes. They'd give me a shirt. I showed up in newish black jeans, a brown leather belt, and clean black sneakers. After stand-up, which was the most rigid staff meeting I'd ever seen, the shift manager, who I hadn't met yet, said I was dressed appropriately and would not be able to interact with customers. I asked what was wrong with my clothes. He said they only wear dark blue jeans and black belts. I said his boss only said dark jeans and a belt. Black jeans are dark and I was wearing a belt. He said I could stand by the drink station and fetch drinks and condiments for the server I was shadowing. I told him I wasn't interested in that. I was looking for a simple serving job, not a militant, dehumanizing soul suck. I changed out of the shirt and left it in the bathroom. The GM emailed me and said she explained the situation to the other manager and asked if I'd give it another shot. I said no and that they were running a cult, not a restaurant. The critically lauded place I worked at in Chicago was challenging but full of respect and joy, and that she needed to take a look at what sort of environment she was fostering at this location. She thanked me for the feedback and said the offer was open if I changed my mind. Story 95. I seen me quit in less than 30 seconds. I rode out with the guys to a very large brand new apartment complex. It was about 1985. They dropped me off with a rake and told me they would be back to pick me up around noon for lunch. I raked about 30 seconds until reality set in. Hell no. Set the rake down and walked home. Funny thing is, my wife's Uncle Lenny was the first family to rent from those apartments. Story 96. Worked at a lumber mill swing shift. Many people would take their first break in their car, then leave the site, never to return. It was a hard job. Story 97. Working in logistics has taught me that even the best hiring processes can still surprise you. Our onboarding for drivers is pretty thorough interview, reference checks, police check, medical and physical. The whole process usually takes a few weeks. A while back, I hired a driver who had been working in a different industry for a few years, but wanted a change. I decided to give him a shot. His first day started at 6 a.m. About an hour later, I got a call from the police saying one of our trucks was parked in the middle of a busy road, blocking a lane of traffic. At first, we thought something must have gone wrong and that the new driver might have had an emergency. After trying to call him several times while I was on my way over, he finally sent a text. "Job's not for me. Good luck." That experience changed how we bring new drivers into the team. To this day, every new starter rides with one of our trusted drivers before going out on their own. Sometimes the best processes come from the lessons you only need to learn once. Story 98. Had this happen a few months ago, I was supposed to be training someone on how to stock the shelves. When he found out he wasn't going to working on a forklift all the time, he He left before I could even start training him. Story 99. I was a manager at Cummins. Kid's dad worked there. We hired the kid. After 6 hours, he said, "Tell my dad I'm out. I'm out of his house in this stupid job." Story 100. Me. Back when I was in grad school, I worked summers doing landscaping. I worked several summers for a great company, but decided not to work with them again after several folks I liked and respected quit. Found another landscaping gig. On day one, I go to the site to meet the owner, and I'm the only one there. Turns out the rest of his crew were on another project, so I would be working alone for my first day. Next, the owner asks me where my tools were. I told him I did not know I needed to bring my own since they had been provided at my previous job. So he walks me over to a patch of solid dirt and tells me I need to dig several holes for planting trees. Fine with me, where's the shovel? He tells me that all his tools are at the other job site and I'll have to dig by hand. He leaves me to work, and after about 10 minutes, I just get in my car and leave. Duck that guy. Later that same day, I got a call from somebody I used to work with at my old landscaping job. He started his own business and asked if I could work for him that summer. Great guy, great job. It worked out in the end. Story 101. I was regional manager for a startup. I was there for 2 years, and the owners were self-proclaimed geniuses. We weren't doing well. They hired and let me know this new person was going to be my boss. I quit immediately. The lady who replaced me worked there 2 days. Story 102. I quit a catering job after my first shift when they made me serve food cafeteria style from a chafing dish. All other catering jobs I've had, you either set up and replenish a buffet, serve family style, serve individually plated, or do past apps. There was something that felt off about lunch lady style service for a wedding. Plus the place was just weird, and I got bad vibes. Story 103. It was me. Got hired at a restaurant. Noticed all the employees were miserable. The guy training me told me checks are often late. Then I noticed the old male owner rubbing the thighs of the younger female GM in the back. Got my stuff and left in about 2 hours. Story 104. I worked a second job part-time at a car wash and saw someone last a couple hours into their first shift before bailing on it. Customer service associates had to stand at the pay stations and sell memberships, and she was just done with it a few hours in and left. The manager flagged her down and talked her into sticking around a little longer, but that was it. Story 105. We had a temp admin assistant run out to her car to grab a sweater, and she burned rubber leaving the parking lot. This was probably 2 hours in. Story 106. It's not a leaving before working too long, but knew someone who left in the middle of a shift, and her boyfriend robbed the grocery store in the same plaza. Like maybe she got a job there as a part of the plan. It wasn't a very good plan because she got arrested while in the act, and that's why she never came back to work. Story 107. Fastest was probably me. I started a job, realized it was a telemarketing scam, and the boss was hurling around racial slurs at the morning meeting. I left at lunch and never looked back, made it 3 hours. Story 108. Me. I started at a plastic manufacturer, and my first day, they stuck me in charge of 2 machines alone with no direction. I tried my best and tried to ask for help. When the first break came, I got in my car and left without a word to anyone. Story 109. After a tour of the building and his work area, a guy said we didn't have enough bathrooms in our building, and he couldn't work here. Walked away, and we never heard from him again. Story 110. I work in healthcare, and we had a nurse quit mid-shift in a fiery way after being disrespected by the doctor in front of the patient. The doctor, in the employee's defense, was a total asshole. He said that he quit in the middle of his shift and walked out the door. The doctor called after him asking if he'll be there at the staff meeting the next day. It was funny. Turns out the doctor is literally mentally ill and doesn't realize she's the problem. Story 111. Work at a restaurant. Girl got hired, showed up for first day. First step, watch orientation videos for 30 minutes. Wasn't even through the first one, 5 minutes long maybe, and grabbed her stuff and left. Story 112. Had a guy at Domino's quit less than 10 minutes after finally arriving for his first shift. It had been put off multiple times already because his anxiety was so bad. He said he needed a smoke break after we showed him what he'd be doing. A few minutes later, I saw him walking down the outer road my store was on while carrying half of his uniform. Story 113. At a former company, the finance director left for lunch on his first day and never came back. They finally reached him to ensure he wasn't dead. He was fine. Apparently, he came, saw, and ran. That finance department was completely ducked up. The CFO was a total ass. Story 114. My sup at my last job said they hired someone that couldn't read for a call center job. Apparently, the person had help from friends or family to apply and get through the interview. First day they started, they were like, I can't read, help me. And they were immediately fired. Of course. Story 115. I used to work at a paint factory. The job was pretty dirty and stinky at times as well as physically hard, but I liked it there, since the pay was very decent and the group was great. I was mostly the one who trained all the summer workers. I never had anyone quit on the same day, But there was one summer we had to hire 5 summer workers because they quit after a short time. Finally, the 5th sticked on for the few remaining summer months. It was quite frustrating to train 5 guys for the same job one after another. I remember that 2 of them quit after 2 days and 2 after a week. In general, over the years, there were quite a few people who worked there for a very short time, which is understandable. Eventually, the business dried up, production was gradually moved elsewhere, and the factory closed down. I was lucky I got a nice severance package. Immediately got back into university as the factory closed, and now I'm working as a software developer. Story 116. Just to clarify, were they not going to be paid for their work on Friday, or was it just that they weren't going to receive payment that day and would presumably receive it the following Friday? Story 117. I got a job in a hotel bar whilst at school. First shift, a guy, clearly trying to impress a date, paid £10 for 2 glasses of champagne and gave me a £20 note and told me to keep the change in front of his date. When she went to the toilet, he asked me for his change back. Then the manager started talking about split shifts and I never went back. Bartending was not for me. Story 118. It was me in high school. I left my 3-hour training shift for dishwashing in the middle when I realized there was no way to keep the dishes sanitary. Spent about an hour trying to figure out how they actually wanted to do the job and realized it wasn't possible and walked out. Story 119. Back in the day, was asked to train a new employee on computer system. I met with him about 1 hour. He stepped out for a smoke break and I saw him talking to one of the hourly guys as he headed back inside. That was it. He left. Turned out the hourly guy knew him as the neighbor who abused the guy a few years back. Story 120. I know someone that started working for a company as an engineer, picked up the van, and started working on day 1. Day 2, they handed back the van, along with their resignation, and said nothing was worth the crap that this company expected employees to deal with. Story 121. Showed up to my first day of work as a cook at Haas's. They were like, actually, we really need a dishwasher since he called off, so you can start there. I quit immediately. Story 122. This one is about me. First day on the job, working at Lois. I get handed off to a guy for training. He immediately takes me outside to the garden area. No one at any point during the job posting, interview, or onboarding process told me I would be working outside. I'm ginger as hell, afraid of most bugs, no sunscreen. A spider got on my arm. I wasn't there for 2 hours before I just walked across the parking lot, got in my car, and left forever. Story 123. I worked at McDonald's. Lots of turnover. It's a lot of people's first experience with a job, and it can be a busy place. The manager scheduled a new hire to start on a mid-shaft on a Tuesday. It was summer, but it should have been a pretty chill time to start. Not that Tuesday. 2 busloads of teenage boys pulled up in the parking lot on their way to some tournament. The place was packed. I saw the new hire walk in, look around, shake her head, and walk out the door. The manager came looking for her a few minutes later and couldn't believe she hadn't even made it to the counter. He pulled up the security feed later and let out a long, heavy sigh. I worked there for a couple years, and while I think fondly of some of the people I worked with, I have never enjoyed quitting a job as much as I did that one. Food service should be paid all the money. Story 124. I quit before lunchtime on day 1 after seeing how disgusting gross the kitchen was. No way I'm working in an environment like that and preparing food for people. Story 125. I had a contract to drive a truck from South England to Scotland as it was being sold. I was going to have to spend a night in it to make it. I got in the cab and the smell was what could only be described as horrific. Then I pulled the curtains to make sure they closed so I could get some decent shut-eye. Spunk stains near the bunk side of the curtain. I didn't even give them a chance. I just bounced. Story 126. My mom was scared and in the ER. I asked to go and be with her. My boss said no. I just looked at him as I walked past him to the door. She was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer later that afternoon. Story 127. I'm in KC. A guy, late 20s, came in asking about a job he heard we were hiring. I asked if he had a resume. He handed it to me. I knew the last company he worked for. I shot my buddy over there a text. While I was talking to this guy, I got a text back saying he was fine. Shows up, won't embarrass you. This is about all the requirements I needed. It was a very entry-level position. I asked if he had time to interview. Now I had my morning open. He said all the right things and I offered him the position and he accepted. I told him there was some corporate onboarding videos and stuff, and if he wanted to do right, then I'd pay him. He does them, it's like 4 hours. Technically, we have to have a substances test passed on file. I was like, oh, can you pass a substances test right now? If not, I had the power to drag my feet on issuing for a few weeks. I didn't say that part out loud because he immediately said, oh yay, definitely. I was like, sweet, I can set you up today or tomorrow to go do that. He said, I'll do it today. I was like, dang, this guy's a go-getter. I called and set it up. I told him it would be an hour, but he could hang out with my warehouse manager until then and I'd pay him for the full day. Then 20 minutes later, he says, my allergies are acting up. Is it okay if I run to my truck and get my allergy medicine? My manger was like, Sure, whatever you need. We watched him get in his car and drive away. Thought maybe he went to corner store. 30 minutes later, I called him and he says, "Yeah, sorry boss. Allergies here are just too bad. I'm driving back to California." Story 128. Fastest time, never even clocked in for my first shift. Interviewed fresh out of college for a medical job. I do 3 interviews, tours, meet the providers, all thrilled and happy. Fill out paperwork, they do background check. Told should be all good. I've been assigned a parking spot and come in on next day. Drive up and park next morning, get a text from their HR. I called to confirm. They say I was hired by mistake for a position that didn't actually exist, apologized and hung up. It was so bizarre. I work in medical, my background is clean, I'm a veteran. Only other thing I can figure is I'm also gay. I wasn't married to my now wife at the time. It was in a very conservative area, but I don't know how they'd figure that out in a background check. Story 129. Well, it was my first day and someone else quit because of it. I was called in for an interview for an unpaid internship on a Saturday. I went in, the place looked sleazy, not a real office, but my parents were really pushy about putting a law firm or professional role on my resume while I was home for 4 months in a gap between my study abroad program and regular school. So I took the offer to allow me to work 40 hours for free. When I went in for my first day, one of the office staff and the 2 junior attorneys seemed excited to have me there, except one woman who sneered and refused to show me anything when asked. Walking back from my car at lunch, I heard shouting, and then that woman comes barreling out the door, cursing and shouting about quitting, and then screams, "Duck you at me," and peels out of the lot. Apparently, no one told her or anyone knew was coming. They thought there was a good chance I wouldn't show up given the circumstances, and she didn't know I wasn't being paid. She thought they'd refused to give her a raise and hired me instead. Then I walk in wearing looking expensive, business casual clothes into the rundown space they operated out of with barely any heat, ripped carpets, and the attorneys who don't get actual clerks from any law school, because it's a crap low-end firm where of the attorneys ended up suspended and the other one barred from the practice of law, fawning over and showing off to their new college intern. So she built up a head of steam all morning, waiting for the boss to agree to meet with her, and then exploded when he didn't come in, and the next senior attorney didn't agree to her ultimatum to give her a raise. On one hand, I felt bad that she left her job because of me and a misunderstanding. On the other hand, any other job had to be better than that place. It was a goldmine for stories like the former paralegal who had to be let go because she was caught doing substances in the bathroom by a client. If my parents knew how bad it was there, they would have dropped the build your resume insistence. But my dad had bribed me by offering to pay me hourly for working there himself rather than taking the daycare job I'd found, and that was tax-free. So I just toughed it out. Story 130. Never turned up to the second trial day. It was a fancy house manager job, and I already had a bunch of experience with the madness of catering to the ultra-rich, so I was not easy to frighten off, but damn. Current house manager was 8 months along with her pregnancy and barely on her feet, told me casually the resident kid, who lived in a separate apartment with security personnel and a nanny, often requested several meals in the evening before anything would be acceptable. The child in question was 7 years old, and we are talking a full restaurant menu, not a plate of nuggets. No replacement for holidays or sick days, or pregnancy apparently, shopping at the market for fresh fruit and veg daily, and, I crap you not, a puma in the backyard menagerie. I was told there were caretakers for the death kitty, but after leaving that evening, I regained enough sanity to run for the hills. Never even bothered going back to pick up my shoes. I still wonder if they found anyone to sell that bridge to. Story 131. I was a data entry trainer for a Microsoft learning company in Scottsdale in the 90s. Everyone I trained came from Kelly Temp agents. It was strictly data entry for the seminar training class, register, etc. You would get hired if you did a great job. I started at the company that way a few years before. I was in my 20s. Great company, but went bankrupt when it was sold. After being a startup, one lady had been there a few days. She brought in pictures of her family, which I didn't mind, but something I've never seen before. As a temp, and even very rare now, she was doing great. It was in the winter. Winter in Scottsdale basically means a not-so-heavy jacket. She left one day in her second week for lunch and never came back. She left all her stuff at the cubicle, yellow jacket, pictures of the family. Boss and I gave her to the next day and then notified Kelly if she didn't show. She never showed. We notified. She was doing great. Kelly agency, after a week, never heard from her again. I packed up her stuff. Kelly came by and picked it up. As far as I know, 6 months later, they never did hear from her. Shipped her the personals. Another temp started in the summer. She was a strange cat. She was doing okay for her first day, but would ask questions not related to work. Just acted strange at the end of the day. She wanted to leave her shoes in her cubicle trash can and walk out barefoot in the summer in hot pavement to her car. She did. I told my boss. We were concerned she was on medication. She called Kelly. Never came back. We again had shoes picked up. New person started the next day. This cubicle was right outside the boss's office. Those are two that stand out the most. These were the first. There are so many if you do any training. Story 132. Had a new hire who immediately quit the first time one of his coworkers used the Lord's name in vain. He quit because I could not guarantee to him that people wouldn't be swearing around him. This was a 50-plus-year-old man who was unloading trucks in a grocery store in Story 133, 4 hours. I worked one shift at Blockbuster and watched the two managers spend over an hour trying to figure out how to add another movie to the existing shelf. After they made their executive decision, I walked over, moved a movie to a different shelf, and for the new movie right in. Felt like I was working for a couple of idiots, so I quit that day. Story 134. I got a job fresh out of university in a truck shipping warehouse, mostly for medical devices. It was so confusing and particular about how the paperwork needed to be done for customs. I was struggling to grasp it, $14 back then. The woman training me was going on mat leave, so I also realized I'd be working with 3 old men in this crap office and had a panic attack. I think I lasted a week, never came back after the attack. It was too embarrassing, and also my body's way of telling me it wasn't a good fit. Found a way better job after. Story 135. Asked about couple bags of PPE that sat in the office. Was for 2 hires starting the next day. Next day comes and goes, but no hires. They got offered more money by a competitor in the time they'd applied and accepted at this place. Another time, someone turned up at the job site and barely made it 20 steps before they said, "I can't do this." Left, and we didn't see them again. Story 136. I got a job at a local CVS. Did orientation and all that, and then the manager comes in and leads me to the back room. It's a total mess. Tells me to organize it, and he will check on me in an hour. Went to the bathroom and never came back. Story 137. First day, a new hire joined the team and was shadowing a coworker. The district manager came in. DM found a single candy bar upside down, then proceeded to yell about it. Employee took off store shirt, sets it on counter, and walked out. Story 138. I went to a trade school for welding, and myself and someone else got chosen for an apprenticeship, and we started a job at the same time. It started out on the job training, and maybe a couple days and an incident happened. I remember a guy was showing me what to do, and I heard screaming, and I look over and someone was on fire. He was trying to pat it off his pants leg, but it looked like it was spreading. Someone yelled out, "Get on the ground," and then they sprayed him with an extinguisher. That wasn't the part that made me quit. The part that made me quit was the seconds after that. I got a pat on the back and heard a chuckle from guy training me. He said, "You'll get used to it." Then I looked back over, and numerous people were laughing, and the guy on the ground was there, still on the ground laughing as well. I was only 19 at the time and understood that a career in welding was perfect. Starting at my age, I could have made a lot of money, but I immediately walked off, and the guy training me thought I was joking. I didn't want to be in a career where being set on fire was something to get used to. Story 139. I was an on-call refrigeration technician. When you were on call, you were 24/7. The job eventually burned me out, so I got a job as a dispatcher for another company. Boss called me in the middle of the night. My first day said I needed to take a service call. We went back and forth about my responsibility. Eventually, I ran the call, got to the job, and found a bad compressor, was going to need a crane to get it on the roof, and it had to be done that night. Told my boss I'm going to need help. He said, "You are on your own." I said, "No, I'm not." I drove back to the shop and left my truck and keys there. Story 140. I worked in an office in 2020. The news came out about the COVID shutdown, but we were told we'd stay open. The next day, a customer came in wearing a full hazmat suit. She got this horrified look on her face and ran out. We never saw her again. Story 141. Oh, wow. I worked jobs in the 90s where people showed up for one day and never to be seen again. This wasn't even unusual. Crummy convenience store job that no one really wanted. Story 142. Fastest guy I've seen walk out was the guy who came in from a church bus, so he was stuck at the factory. Walk up the 40 steps to the hot floor to work with me, was well over 100 and super humid. Comes straight up to me and introduces himself, asks where the bathroom is, which is on that floor, proceeds to go back to the stairs and never came back. He left the factory and I never saw him again. Had another young guy in a different room come in on his first day, work for a few hours, came back from his break and said, "I have to leave, my boyfriend is pregnant." He was very flamboyant, but it was still bizarre. Story 143. Got this grass mowing job, show up first day with some other guy. It's pouring, so no cutting. They take me and the other new guy to these slums to clean out. Needless to say, they were disgusting, and that guy quit in 20 minutes. I quit about an hour after. It's one thing if doing that crap is in the job description, but I was hired specifically to mow grass. Pay was crap anyway, duck them. Story 144, half an hour. Twice I worked in a very busy department store, shoe department. Part of my job was to train new associates. The first day was show them around the department, including the stockroom in the morning, then after lunch, have them shadow me. The first one was a young lady. She was completely overwhelmed by the size and scope of our stockroom. She asked to be excused to use ladies' room and walked out the door. The second one was a young guy with a bit of a tude. He said he could figure it all out and he just wanted to sell. I told him the steps for training were required and I had to document what I showed him. He got belligerent with me. After that, he said HR called him dual to complete a training video they missed. He simply left. Story 145. I started a plumbing course. Day release. Really difficult to get accepted. First break in the canteen, two young lads in the queue said, "Shall we go?" And "Yes, let's go." Turned out they quit the course. Ironically, they went to see their boss and he sacked them. Course tutor wasn't able to replace them. So Brucey bonus, we all had to pass, or the course was null and void. One question we all got correct was, where does the word plumber come from? Literally that same morning, I told everyone I'd done Latin at school and plums was Latin for lead. Water pipes were originally in lead. Story 146. Worked at an investment bank in New York during the dot-com bubble in tech. Had a guy start, leave for lunch, and never come back. Called the agency. Apparently he started 2 jobs that day, one at 9 a.m. and one at 1 p.m. He liked the second one more, I guess. Those were the days. You could throw your resume out and have like 6 job offers in 72 hours. Story 147. Dude came in on his first day. We gave him the onboarding paperwork to fill out, and he disappeared within a few minutes. This was for a studio photography assistant position, and this guy seemed like a good fit. After about 45 minutes, I went to our lounge to check on him since it had been a really long time. And I just found a note saying, this place would not fulfill his artistic needs. It would not have been an issue for him to just come say it wasn't the right job for him and he changed his mind. And I've forever thought of him as a coward. No one would have been mean and we would have wished him the best. But I guess that was a bullet dodged if that's how he conducted himself. Story 148. Personally, I went through a 4-hour orientation meeting at Old Navy to then be told my first few shifts would be the overnights unloading the trucks. The orientation was about working the floor, folding clothes, and working the register. There was nothing about working nights or unloading trucks. Only went back to collect my paycheck 2 weeks later, story 149. My brother got a job at a funeral home in exchange for room. He had to make the runs in the middle of the night to pick up the deceased and drive the hearse in the funeral procession. The previous person didn't last one night. They didn't lock out the freight elevator, and through the night it would groan and settle. Those sounds made the previous person flee the haunted building. Story 150. Applied at a job at an abattoir. Mate convinced me with stories of huge cash. Didn't have an interview. Received a message to come in for induction. Being young and dumb, didn't realize what that meant. Went in, did the induction, walked out, and never went in for first shift. In my eyes at the time, I was going in for an interview. Didn't realize I already had the job. Glad I walked though, the place was rough. Story 151. Not sure if this counts. I had been signed off work after tearing the ligaments around my elbow. Work-related injury. I was signed off for 6 weeks. The day I was due to return to work, the manager guy rang me and said, "Before you go in, meet me at Costa for a chat." Said chat went along the lines of him. "How are you now?" Med said, "I'm able to return. I have to wear this elbow support, but I'm good to go." Him. "That's good. You can come back. But should know that if you walk in the door, I will have to give you a disciplinary." I had provided doctor's notes and kept them updated daily. "I don't think you would accept a disciplinary." Me. "Give me a disciplinary and I'll see you in court." I get up to leave. Him. "Where are you going?" Me. "Home and I won't be back." Him. You can go in and say goodbye to everyone." Me. "No, you said you'd have to give me a disciplinary if I walked through the door." What was the most legendary I quit that you know about or witnessed? Story 1. I'm going to say my own. I had an awful boss when I first started working, where I still work now. She was never on time, took no ownership, and often lied, like saying she was going to a depot for the day, then not ever showing up. She obviously smoked a lot of and stank of it. Anyways, year-end and performance reviews came, and she started listing things I need to get better at or improvements, but they were all things that were her job. For example, ensuring cover is in place when a team member is off sick. I had received great feedback from peers and the senior team. Even the exec gave me a star award for work on a project. Anyways, I tried to back myself, but she kept going until I got so fed up I just told her to duck off and walked out. The room grabbed my coat, bag, and headed towards the car park. As I got outside, I heard someone behind me shouting my name. Turn around, and it's the director of projects who asked me what was happening. I was still so angry, I just ranted at him for a good 5 minutes. He then said, "Go home. I'll sort it. I don't expect to see you until the new year. Thank you for all your hard work." It was like 20th December or something. So I take the time off and go back 2nd January to find she's gone, and I took her job. I'd say it was a win overall. Story 2. I was in an office meeting where the CEO was literally shouting at everyone and saying how we are stupid and other nasty stuff. My colleague suddenly started typing something on his laptop, stood up, picked up the resignation letter he had printed, signed it, and gave it to the CEO before he was even done with his speech, shouting, then simply walked out the door without saying a word. The CEO was left speechless. Story 3. Not so much a I quit, but in my country, we have a law that requires companies to give employees a permanent contract after 3 temporary contracts or after X months. So when my colleague's 3rd contract was done, they said they would love to keep her, but she had to wait for 3 months to get a new contract because they did not want to give the permanent contract. Obviously, she felt not appreciated and her manager was crazy as fuck. The company did not realize how much work she actually did and that the manager wasn't doing that work at all. It was all her. She urged that she could do a handover because there was so much admin and systems only she knew how to do. They didn't take her seriously. A week after she was gone, they started to panic and realized things went to crap. They hired some expensive project manager, but obviously without a proper handover, she couldn't manage either. My colleague did wrote some handbooks, but without a handover, it was too complicated for someone to get on a moving train. It would take a few weeks. After 2 weeks, the project manager got green light to contact the colleague who left. She rightfully told them that she had given many chances for a handover and now was no longer working for them. But they could hire her as a freelancer if they needed her. Because obviously they only wanted the handover and no long-term assignment, my colleague charged them with an insane hourly rate. They said it was not in line with the work, it was double the rate the expense project manager cost, etc. She replied, "I don't need you, you need me. So this is my rate, you can take it or leave it." And gave a bit more context that she already started a new job and she had to take days off, so it would actually cost her money to do this for them. The project manager was annoyed and said it wasn't conform the market, said it was rude to ask this. But I think my colleague knew how screwed they were, and she had them on their knees. They very much end up paying the hourly rate. She did not went down a single penny. In the end, I think they actually respected her for it. Story 4, a woman stormed out the office. We all went to the window to watch her leave as we were on the 3rd floor outside the office. There was a giant roundabout, the kind with grass, bushes, and trees. Instead of walking on the path around the roundabout, she just straight-lined it out the office door, over the road across the roundabout, through the bushes and everything, and off into the sunset, never to be seen again. Story 5. My coworker was treated badly by management but couldn't just quit because he had a mortgage and a daughter in college. Every morning when he came in, he said to the receptionist, "I'm not quitting today." Then one morning he came in early and left his laptop on her chair. He had a new job and never went back. Story 6. In my much younger days, I was a cook in a restaurant. The price of lemons had spiked, and the owner decided they were going to charge 25 cents for a lemon wedge when someone ordered iced tea. A certain waitress didn't like that and got some flack from a client, so she walked into the kitchen, where the owner happened to be, clocked out, and yelled at him, loud enough to be clearly heard in the dining room. "You can take your ducking lemons and your ducking job and stick them up your ducking asshole," and walked out. Story 7. I quit after a narcissist asshole I worked with came in my office and said, as a quasi-partner, not his words, but that's what he was, that I need to assume the account management role of someone they'd just let go. I'm a writer and work on the creative team. It was weird too because he closed the door and it was just the two of us and was using threatening language like no other choice. I walked out and went home that afternoon. The next day I came back in and I met with one of the actual partners who said the incident was unfortunate. What was fortunate was my husband was able to pick up our health benefits. The main reason I was working at this dysfunctional agency in the first place, and the main reason many Americans stay in jobs they don't like. Health insurance is ridiculously expensive here. Like in our case, as expensive as our mortgage for a family of 3. I negotiated keeping the agency as my freelance client for writing, creative direction, but working from home. Now that I write this down, it doesn't sound too legendary, but it felt that way at the time. Story 8. Many years ago, at a grocery store. My order was normal sized, but the bagger took off his apron and threw it on my groceries at the end of the conveyor belt, shouted, "Duck this crap," and stormed out. I looked at the cashier and said, "Did he just quit?" Guess so," she replied. Maybe not legendary, but pretty funny. Story 9. I was not out of high school long. Had a boss that had a temper. He was yelling at me over some stupid crap someone else had done. I was dealing with it barely until he poked me in the chest. That's when he got a broken nose. A couple of the guys I used to work with said he pretty much quit getting in people's faces and yelling after that. Story 10. In my mind, it was legendary, and I did run into a few employees that were there after I left. I was working at a club as a cook where they had early afternoon banquets and normal brunch. Lunch customer. The owner was notorious in my city for being a nightmare employer by using simple rules to rip off her employees. She would not allow them to have a lunch break between 11 to 2, then at 2, When you asked for a break, she would send you home early but still dock you an hour for a lunch break, claiming it's not her fault you didn't take a break. She did this mainly to summer students. Also, the manager was a bit of an ass by changing the schedule for his employee friend so he didn't have to work Friday night if there was a party that Buddy wanted to go to. Only he would change it Thursday night after closing, and me, would come in for Friday and set up. Then after it was done, he would tell me that, "Oh, I changed the schedule. You were supposed to come in tonight." While him and his friend would sit in the office and wait until I was finished, set up, and prepped to tell me. One of the owner's rules was if you didn't wear your club shirt with club logo on it, you would not be paid. I was in that day early, on my scheduled day off because they needed someone and no one was available. I am in my spiffy Cook's Whites still prepping for the lunch brunch rush and unloading a food delivery for the big banquet that afternoon. I think it was for the Board of Governors. Owner walks by and says, "You are not in your club shirt, so you won't be paid for today." I tell her I was asked to come in at 11 last night, and my club shirt was dirty from previous shift. Also, this was my usual day off. She replied, "You could have washed it before you came in." I told her that I couldn't have done that because my apartment building doesn't allow use of washing machine after 10 due to noise. She says I could have washed it in the sink and walked away. Now, after each of these statements, she reiterated that no club shirt, no pay. So there I was standing with a cart full is frozen food in the foyer. I went to her office with the cart still there and asked her point blank, "Am I getting paid for this morning?" She repeated, "No club shirt, no pay." "Okay, well, bye then." I walked out, grabbed my bag and helmet, and rode home. The hostess, frazzled by that time, saw me leave and started to ask about the food in the foyer. I replied, "Ask the owner." Later that day, I get a frantic call from the hostess asking when I will be coming back. I could hear the owner in the background telling her what to say. She thought I was only going home to get my shirt. I tell her to ask the owner if I will be paid for the morning. Her confused response was, "The owner says no." I tell her that's my answer too. I will pick up my check next week. The legend part was I ran into an old employee from the place a few years later, and he tells me that day was a disaster. Apparently there was no one to come in. The guests arrived and the host didn't know of the owners. No pay rule. She tried to get some of the wait staff to fill in as food prep, but because a lot of them were dinged by owners, no pay rule they wouldn't, because the owner was notorious for not paying wages for ridiculous reasons, even if you were doing her a favor. The food stayed in the foyer for most of the afternoon. Story 11. They passed over me for a promotion twice for someone in HR's friends and then asked me to train the 2 people they hired off the street. I had already been working a second job at the time, so I took my badge off and said no thanks and left. Story 12. I'm going out to lunch. Junior attorney never came back from lunch and was seen a few days later at the airport with a wealthy, older female client. After 2 months, his landlord asked us where he was. Apartment turned out to be empty. Just packed up everything he owned and left the country. Story 13. I used to work in this massive shop building, steel rod mill equipment, kind of death-defying crap. Crazy positions for hours and hours. We were union, and we were making bank. We had this pneumatic hose reel that was fastened to the brick wall, maybe about 7 feet up to be out of the way of people inking their heads on it. Well, it would randomly unlock itself and reel in the airline on occasion, and be super frustrating when you were all in position and comfortable working on your parts. One day I'm grinding away with a whizzer wheel, and the piece of crap retracts and whips the grinder out of my hands, and it cut my midriff because of the way I was positioned. I'm seeing red after this happened. I grabbed a big sledgehammer and proceed to smash this ducking thing off the wall. My boss comes running over, waving his arms. Airline is blasting full tilt. No one can hear anything, and that's how I quit. Went down the street and had another job lined up within an hour. Cowboy living. Story 14. I worked in a large grocery store. My department manager was an absolute bum who would write the schedule, then put his feet up for most of his shift, playing chess on an old clamshell phone, unless he was fondling some dried fruit displays. He'd have the nerve to leave me an insurmountable laundry list of tasks every night, then trash me the next day for what wasn't completed. Well, one day, the place was a true mess, and I'd had enough. I wrote a note mimicking his foolish lists, rife with vulgarities and mockery. I even forged his crafty handwriting. The next night, we were on together. He made me work the whole shift before confronting me and trying to drag me into the cooler where there were no cameras. He insulted me and told me he didn't like my work. This was the clincher for me, because I tried very hard and am an industrious person. He tried to fire me, not within his scope of power, so I said, "Duck you," took off my work shirt, balled it up, and nailed him directly in the chest. I walked out onto the sales floor and threw my stupid hat up into the drop ceiling tiles, and one almost fell. "Big Mama," at seafood counter exclaimed, "Oh, crap." I headed outside to cool off, and a senior in the department followed, telling me to go talk to the store manager. My boss was already up there ratting on me. and it was clear they were colluding on this since before my shift began. The manager threatened to shove the note down my ducking throat. The moment he said those words, I turned, gave him a proud middle finger, and walked out in silence. I walked home in the rain, called my union rep the next day, recorded my account of the incident in 2 typed pages, and took a paid vacation because I felt unsafe in the workplace due to X and Y's extreme lack of professionalism and bodily threats. After a long meeting where I promised to go through the proper channels appropriately, my union rep destroyed both clowns in front of their district supervisor. I was then informed that not fired, nor was my resignation accepted just yet. It turned out another department was short, so I joined them. Day 1, my new boss comes up to me as I'm packing out some cans. He leans down to whisper, "Hey kid, I heard what you did to Tony. Ducking legendary." He fist bumped me, and now I have a pension coming to me when I retire. Story 15. A kid in the supermarket didn't want to keep facing and making the shelves neat-looking, and he was called in, assured that he wouldn't be facing. Lo and behold, he was told that he'd be facing again, and that night he did the most incredible facing that anyone has ever done, with the added touch of every single item being turned upside down. He was never seen again. Story 16. I got a 2-for-1 special once a couple of positions ago. Long story short, 2 of my front office ladies were being mean girls to the new hire. So bad I had to get HR involved, and we ended up allowing transfer to a new department. HR said there was enough to fire those 2 if I wanted to press that route. During that fiasco, these 2 mean girls were upset because I would not fire the new hire because they didn't like them. They both came into my office and gave 2-week notice, both of them, together. I said, "That is okay, your services are no longer needed by the department. I need your badges and you need to leave immediately." I walked them out. Story 17. Not really legendary, but it was a call center job and I have an exotic mix of languages and was clearly overqualified for the job. The company hired through temp agencies to, legally questionably, extend the probationary period of permanent position. And I was on my 3rd renewal when I was called into the office and condescendingly told that while my performance and telephone etiquette left some to be desired, they were generously offering me a 4th temporary 3-month contract. I declined, saying that I had accepted a permanent job starting at the end of my current temporary contract. At the same time, there was so much whining why they couldn't fill German-speaking roles and hold on to German speakers. While paying the same foreign language supplement, they'd pay for English or Portuguese, which are much easier to in the market they operate. Story 18. A lady walked into the restaurant I was working at, threw her uniform on the counter and said, "I can make more money than this walking to my mailbox." Story 19. We got a new shift manager at my factory in 2009. A few days before he started, the lads said, "Keep an eye out for a strange little ginger bloke staring at random people then walking off." This turned out to be new gaffer. Anyway, next week he comes in and pulls everyone in the canteen and gives us the talk. At the end of the 8s, honestly, mind blown. He says, "If any of you duckers don't like it, we can go outside and have a square go." Now I burst out laughing at the sheer absurdity of this, but he doubled down and said it again. One of the lads tapped him 9 in the shoulder and said, "You know what, mate, it'll have some F that my missus just walked out on me and the kids, and I'm dying to let it all out." The lad was a ducking unit and known for being a bit naughty in his past. New gaffer went about 3 shades of white and ran to the office, closely followed by Big Lad. Big Lad loses his crap, and it takes 4 management guys to stop him turning new gaffer into lasagna. He then, calm as duck, says to me later on, "Mate," grabbed his gear and walked out front. New manager had to be escorted to his vehicle and never came back. It seriously was like some weird fever dream where you look around for cameras. Madness. Story 20. I rage quit on a boss who was stealing cash. Made sure they all knew she was pinning the blame on us. Got 3 months of unemployment pay out of that lady's company. Got her fired eventually. Story 21. Not me, my dad. The delivery coordinator, manager at the place he worked at prior to retiring. The delivery manager was the best they had ever had. Customers loved him, praised him on his communication and efficiency. His delivery guys loved him. The owner was a conniving con artist who specialized in manipulation to get his way. The delivery manager, however, didn't play that game, and the owner was never happy with it. Browbeat him constantly. One day, during a browbeating session, the delivery manager got up from his desk, grabbed his personal belongings, and walked out the door. Told the owner to figure it out himself. They didn't find a competent delivery manager until after the owner killed himself with his drinking. Then his kids took over the business. Story 22. More of a response to your fired scenario. Worked for a company that had a bunch of data centers up and down the East Coast. Vice president was screwing some marketing girl who got mad at a very senior network engineer for not showing her enough respect. She really thought he owed her something for being an executive's mistress. Well, she must have been good in the sack because she got him fired. The following week, both the wife and the mistress got flowers with the other one's name on them. Good times. Story 23. Traveled to another country for a project startup as a consultant. The client showed up with about 8 guys, only 2 of whom were involved with the project. The rest were there for golf and girls. Everyone checked into the resort where we were holding the startup meeting. There was no booking for me. The client said it wasn't for contractors. I'd be staying elsewhere. 4 consultants were required, but I was the only one there. I asked why. We couldn't get them here in time, they said. I barely made it myself with only 3 days' notice to get a work permit. The client said I could just do all 4 jobs for a week, then the others would no doubt arrive. For a 100 million project, I said this wasn't a good idea, as I can't be expected to see everything all the time, test electronic systems, and monitor health and safety of 60 people. That's why we have consultants. I made the mistake of suggesting they plan things ahead of time. Client starts whining about his boss, not giving him enough time. Just enough time to get 8 of his staff to the country club, apparently. Client then tells his underling to find a replacement for me in a week's time, assuming I'd stick around until they arrived. I said no need, picked up my bags and called a taxi. Went to the airport and flew home. Last thing I heard was the client calling my agency telling them he had fired me. Not really true, but whatever. I was working a week later in another country. So their startup meeting with their consultants had no consultants at all. Just golf and girls. Story 24. Worked at a state prison. We had a sergeant that had a belly full of the new administration's BS, lots of violations of written procedures, and he had enough time in to retire. He marched into the warden's office. Warden had stepped out. He stripped down completely naked, made a photocopy of his ass, wrote, "Duck you, I'm retiring," dated, and signed it. Taped it over a picture of the warden and governor shaking hands on the wall. Then sat in the warden's chair and propped his feet up and waited for the warden to return. Warden walks into a naked, fat guy sitting in his chair, junk hanging out, and having rubbed them all over with a wonderful picture of his ass and balls hanging behind him. Guy was a legend after that. Sadly, he passed a year later. Story 25, I worked 2 jobs at 18 while I was trying to figure out what to do in life. One was at a Casey's gas station. The other was at a home as a CNA. The CNA job was willing to either build me a fixed schedule or schedule around the gas station. My hours ranged from 8 to 50 per week at the gas station with no warning, even though I tried to explain that I needed them to pick one or the other if they wanted me to work there. My manager there said it's not their problem. Inevitably, I get scheduled for both on the same day for the same shift for the 3rd time. I was fed up with the manager blatantly being unwilling to help. That day, I didn't even bother to call in. I was at my CNA job, and eventually my lunch break came up. These places were a few blocks away from each other. I had the brilliant idea of throwing a pizza party for the staff at the nursing home. So I went into the Casey's with the manager asking why I wasn't at work. I told her I warned them. Then I proceeded to order 4 large pizzas, and while I waited, I put in my immediate resignation. The look on her face was priceless. Story 26. Hungry Jack's many moons ago, when I was on $4.50 an hour. You were required to wear the correct colored lipstick, or Kathy, the never-pleasant manager, made you put on a bright pink lipstick, basically humiliating you anyway. I was 15, knew it all, and was on a bit of a rebellion. Kathy pulled out that pink lipstick. I tore my hat off, threw it across the room, and yelled, "Duck you, Kathy," and left. 39-year-old me sits at her office desk, wishing she had had the bravery of 15-year-old me. Story 27. I had a friend who had tried to get fired from this job because if he quit, he didn't get unemployment and his health insurance ended right away. So finally, he went and took a piss on his boss's desk. That did the trick. Story 28. Years ago, I worked at a family restaurant with great food and great prices, but management was awful and evil. Management assigned servers to the stations with the best tippers, based loosely on seniority. Because of the working conditions, it was fairly easy to work your way up to a decent station. I got a horrible car accident on my way to work and had to call off. The next day when I showed up, they had demoted me to the worst station. They seated it full of people who would nurse a cup of coffee for an hour. After an hour, I made sure every customer had a full beverage, served every one of them a massive piece of dessert, tore up their checks and threw them out in the bathroom trash, and slipped out the back door. Story 29. Female coworker hooking up with multiple older married male coworkers and telling them to keep quiet. She was receiving money and gifts from them as her sugar daddy. She started hooking up with new male coworker, her age, and he found out about older men and reported them. They were all about to get fired for fake harassment, and they decided to keep quiet because they were married and had grown-up children. One decided to fight back with claims against her with screenshot of mutual hookup. She was in trouble, and before HR could take action, she decided to quit. Story 30. Had a coworker who called our boss. He told him to look out the window. Coworker was sitting in our direct competitor's pickup, giving the boss the one-finger salute. Story 31. I'll do my own. Worked at a place for 10 years. Manager treated me like crap. I stayed because I believed people when they said the manager will treat me better if I worked hard. She sabotaged me, held me back, verbally abused me, and did everything she could to break me. I only got promoted because someone higher than her told her to, but she made it a joint promotion. Her friend got promoted too. I got the extra work and her friend got the pay increase and perks. One day, she told her friend to get parts down, and her friend came down on me, talking to me like I was dumb and incompetent. I let the manager know that if it continued, I would quit. They told me I was crazy and that they always showed me respect. This was after 10 years of poor treatment. After I was told I was too stupid to do anything but run production. After they asked me to fix something that was broken by a nepotism hire. After they repeatedly screamed at me for asking for help in the area I was supposed to manage. They expected me to do all the work by myself. Then, during production meetings, yelled at me for not asking for help because I was constantly behind. After they threatened to fire me for taking a few hours off to attend my brother's funeral. After they told me that they always showed me respect, I quit on the spot. In May, it will be 5 years, and they still regularly contact me to come back. They are harassing me to come back. They have been threatening to sue me for embezzlement because they trained me and I left. Story 32. Company I worked at was migrating to a new billing system. It was not going well, not least of all because the ranks of upper management was comprised of the worst sort of lickspittles and toadies. So the many varied issues being raised by the testing teams weren't being listened to or acted on by the people in charge. Poor management had whittled the entire company's direct debit team down to one person. He'd had no opportunity to learn or test his department's function on the new system. But when he raised that, management framed it as inflexibility and unwillingness to learn on his part. One day, his crap boss takes the opportunity to take a couple more pot shots at him in an all-floor meeting. Direct debits guy waits until the meeting is over, goes back to his desk, packs his crap, and leaves. Crap manager, who had no idea how to do this guy's job, but was quite happy to tell him all the ways he was doing it wrong from within his vast fortress of ignorance, is left to do the direct debit billing run. Between his ineptitude and the disastrous system changeover, he somehow manages to try and take £64,000 on a direct debit for a domestic energy customer's bank account. Luckily, the customer's bank apparently has better controls and more competent leadership, so they flagged and blocked it and notified the customer. It was a big enough blunder that it made the local papers, which was quite embarrassing for the buffoonish manager and senior leadership alike, and very, very funny for the guy who'd peace out and taken their only working knowledge with him. Story 33. A fellow cook had a chip on his shoulder. He was a junk. He decided that he was going to write on a chit, "I quit" name, and slide it under the chef's door. On his way out of the building, he shoved a couple frying pans into the microwave and turned it on high. Story 34. I took my girlfriend to a nice seafood restaurant to celebrate something. We were sitting at the bar, no one else was there. We prob ran up a $400 tab. Appetizers, main course, dessert, and top shelf drinks. Towards the end of our night, we were finishing up our drinks when the manager said something to the bartender. The bartender said, "Duck you, I quit," and proceeded to throw a bucket of ice at him, and then smashed a couple of bottles, yelling in anger. This proceeded into a physical altercation where they both wanted to take it outside. They left and never came back. We sat there for another hour serving ourselves drinks and then left. Free night out on the town. Story 35. I walked out and my boss followed me to my vehicle, all the while screaming at me and attempted to pull me out and beat me. I defended myself and he went pale really quick. The jerk owes me for paper, toner, and phone batteries. Story 36. I was an it guy who had just spent 9 months working for an American company in the Netherlands, rolling out a new web platform across multiple countries, many late nights and weekends away. Lots of sacrifice, but a big win for the company. New CTO comes in fresh off the plane from the USA and decides he wants to make an impression. He calls all of the senior IT guys into a meeting and shouts, "What the duck makes you think you are good enough to work for me?" My response was, "What the duck makes you think you are good enough to lead me?" I stormed out of the building, sent my resignation email to HR when I got home, and made it clear exactly why I was leaving and exactly why I wouldn't be coming back into the office. I spent 3 months on full pay doing gardening leave while sorting out my next gig. New CTO lasted another 6 months before being shipped home with his tail between his legs. Don't light the blue touch paper unless you are ready to deal with the resulting explosion. Story 37. I'm such a wet noodle. I've never had the courage to stand up for myself and treat every job I have like I'm extremely grateful and cannot do any better. I've put up with so much abuse, and you know what? I'll keep taking it because of how pathetic I am. Story 38. A woman that I worked with was well known as a drama queen. On my first day, my supervisor was going over orientation material with me, and she stormed into his office to confront him about why he'd fired her work bestie, attendance. Then she started screaming at him about it and demanded that he return the special training binder that she'd made for her bestie and tell him that he'd better not have already given it to me. He dismissed me back to my desk to read the handbook while he continued the loud discussion. Anyway, she was an account manager, and the company made the strategic decision to fire one of her largest clients. The client was a PETA and was always demanding discounts and freebies and threatening to leave, and the powers that be were over it. They told her that it wouldn't impact her employment at all and started making plans for her to take on several smaller accounts. She was pissed and started making accusations that our boss did this to purposely screw her over. Then, later that week, we see a flurry of papers erupt from her desk in our open concept office. She'd taken all of the papers on her desk, thrown them in the air, and stormed out of the office. While we're all still trying to comprehend what just happened, an email pops into everybody's inbox. She'd sent a delayed email to go to the whole company distribution list, plus all of her customers and a few other high-level contacts. The email announced her resignation and accused the company and several executives of unethical business practices and horrible behavior. Afterwards, HR was forced to do an investigation, but no one else was fired. But I still wonder about some of them. The company put a lock on the all-company distribution list after that. Story 39. I'd already left the job. Owner was, and still is, a complete arse. I was working as a truck heavy equipment tech, and Andrew, real name, he couldn't give a duck, was being hammered as he was now tasked with my workload as well as his, and fearless leader decided. He could also step in as a relief driver too, because why not? The owner, with all the interpersonal skills of a rabid Alsatian, called him while he was driving one of the trucks he was told, though, drive by the owner. As it was important, it got to where it needed to be and ripped into him for not repairing one. If the other trucks in the yard, owner again, decided they needed in a hurry. So Andrew hung up on him, blocked his number, called a friend to come pick him up, and abandoned a fully loaded truck and trailer on the side of the road in the arse end of nowhere. Then called the dispatcher to let her know where it was and send a driver. They didn't have to get it. Then called the owner back to tell him to go duck himself, and all future communications would be done through his lawyer. How the company is still going, nobody knows. Story 40. I was working as a dishwasher at a country club when I was a teenager. The head chef had a crush on my cousin who helped me get the job there. The chef hated me. No idea why. Easter Sunday, I was stuck working alone because the other kid didn't show up. After finishing brunch dishes and preparing for a huge dinner rush, I grabbed a sandwich from the employee food area and went outside, leaving a couple things in the sink area. The chef comes running outside and is screaming at me for some dumb reason. I explained I hadn't eaten or even had a break since morning. He slapped the sandwich out of my hand and started yelling again. Then he made a huge mistake and pushed his fingers into my chest. I was a teen but a freestyle wrestler since I was 8. I grabbed his arm and literally tossed him onto the ground. I was on top of him in complete control. My cousin was freaking out and told me to let him go. He pops up and is obviously embarrassed in front of his crush. He says a few dumb things and storms off into the kitchen. I walk back in and head to the dishwasher area. He has taken every pot and pan and dumped them into the sink. He's smirking and said something like, "Enjoy washing those pots." I look in the sink and there's grease floating on the top of the water. I calmly picked up my car keys, grabbed another sandwich and said, "Go duck yourself. I quit." I went into the front of the restaurant and told my cousin I was quitting. When I walked back through the kitchen, the chef was furiously scrubbing the pans, since I was the only dishwasher. I said enjoying it. I walked out as a chorus of curse words streamed from the kitchen behind. Story 41. Our last CFO unilaterally selected and rolled out a trash system and left the rest of us to deal with trying to make it work. The ultimate duck you. Story 42. Company I worked at hired a receptionist. She reported to one awful woman who reported to one of the 2 male owners, Junk. When they hired her, they told her that they were flexible with time off for medically emergencies or other appointments like that. By the way, that's total BS, as they weren't flexible about anything. One day, the awful woman and Junk were in her office when the receptionist called and asked for some time off. Awful woman denied it because Junk liked people to act like they had power when they were in front of him. The receptionist questioned that, saying, "You said that you would be flexible for medical appointment." Awful woman said something like, "I've been here a long time and I can take time off, but you can't take time off if I tell you no." Junk would not like that anyway. The receptionist, who did not know Junk was sitting in the office with her and that she was on speakerphone, said, "Well, that's a bunch of crap. You take time off all the time, and when you're in your office, you don't even work, and Junk is a ducking asshole prick." Well, Junk flew out of his chair out of the office and ran all the way down the hall in time to see the receptionist had just walked out the door. He was pissed he didn't get the opportunity to fire her. Story 43. It was a Super Bowl commercial for a web hosting company a few years back. Some lady had just launched a website for her business making and selling puppets. They let her bring one of her puppets to the commercial to tell her previous boss I quit. Sometimes I wonder how she's doing. Not every day you see somebody get to quit her job on national television. Story 44. Watched a buddy of mine get well and truly fed up working in the garden center over the summer. Long story short, he grabbed a forklift and drove it across the parking lot to the Taco Bell drive-thru and ordered lunch. He parked right outside the garden center and leisurely ate his lunch, wiped his face with his employee vest, and walked inside to clean out his locker. Epic story 45, my own. I handed in my notice, by letter, it was the 80s, on Valentine's Day. Boss was all smiles. Oh, is this a Valentine's card? Nope, I'm quitting. Horrible job in a shop's restaurant with so many middle managers. Story 46. It's not as legendary, but was really satisfying to witness. Ages ago when I worked in a restaurant, we got a new manager that was just horrible. We had a little ecosystem going there before with lots of silent agreements she just shat on because she couldn't be bothered talking to people. Like people who lived far were roaded more in the middle of a week or early shifts so they can get home, and people living in a city center were more weekend, late nights people, which made people able to stay longer if they had to on the weekends, and they would stay because tips were good. She started with having a guy who lived far rotted on a weekend late shift, but not a close, and then proceeded to sit him tables after his close time. She didn't get how other managers were able to make people stay after their shifts, but other managers knew the barging game and would know who to ask and how to get them to stay and what to offer back instead of force sit them. Then she would do her second favorite thing, which is pick up a random person who just happened to make a minor mistake. Could be anything, like even bartender saying, I got table a drink because you are busy, which we did for each other, and that would get you into a talk on how everyone is crap. Anyway, the guy already had a new job lined up and was to put his 2 weeks in, but after getting sat and then getting yelled at, he went to host, said it's fine to sit him a few more tables to just get through the night, and then came up to the manager, gave her his card, pouch of money, didn't even pay out with her, which he should, and left forever. It was horrifying to see, given I had to finish my shift with her, but also absolutely fantastic.